kind of crazy to explain what a person would go through, coming to prison for the first time.
It was my first felony conviction. I was scared. I'd never been to prison before. We had a highway patrol escort all the way from Orland. A whole lot of guns, a whole lot of dogs, a whole lot of cops.
And they told us, well, okay, you're gonna have to make sure you sit down. Don't stand up, we might have to shoot you,
And we come up over the hill after getting off the interstate. When I first seen it, my heart was like, way up here, the throat. I thought, God, what did I get into?
When I had actually seen the checkpoint, the fence, the gun towers, then I knew it was real.
Opened in 1981, the Wyoming Department of Corrections North Facility saw thousands of inmates pass through it until it was abandoned in 2001. Today, the site still bears witness to those who were housed there. This is the story of Wyoming's only maximum security prison.
Greetings and welcome back. It's your host, Gabe Morales. This video is going to be relatively short, but I didn't want to leave any state out. Many years ago, I taught for Wyoming Department of Corrections on gangs with my buddy Chris Grant, who was considered to be a national native gangs expert. I flew from Seattle into the small Cheyenne airport located in the southeast corner of the state. Then we drove in a rental car to the state pen in Rawlings, where we were supposed to present. Cheyenne is one of the bigger cities in Wyoming, being just over 50,000 people at the time. But after we left there, I recall seeing lots of open prairie, quite a few cattle, but very few people. I thought to myself, it seems like the buffalo outnumber the gangs. Then I saw this sign as we approached Rawlings, and I knew there had to be some activity there. They were announcing that we had arrived at Southside Locos 13 Boulevard. Before we get into how the Department of Corrections there operates, let me give you a little history. What is now southwestern Wyoming became part of the Spanish Empire and later the Mexican Territory of Alta California until it was ceded to the United States in 1848 at the end of the Mexican-American War. French-Canadian trappers from Quebec and Montreal went into the state in the late 18th century, leaving French names on the landscape such as Teton, Laramie, etc. The United States admitted Wyoming into the Union as a 44th state on July 10, 1890. But before that, it was part of the Wild Wild West. The Hole in the Wall Gang was a group of outlaws which took its name from a pass in Johnson County, Wyoming. Several outlaw gangs had their hideouts there. It was not simply one large organized gang of outlaws, but rather an alliance made up of several different gangs, all operating out of the Hole in the Wall Pass, using it as their base of operations. As I stated, these various gangs formed a coalition, each planning and carrying out its own robberies with very little interaction from others. At times, members of one gang would ride with parts of other gangs, meeting up only when each were at the hideout at the same time. Geographically, the hideout had all the advantages needed for any gang attempting to evade authorities. It was easily defended and almost impossible for lawmen to access without detection from the outlaws concealed there. It contained its own infrastructure, with each gang supplying its own food and livestock, as well as horses. A corral, livery stable, and numerous cabins constructed, one or two for each gang. Anyone operating out of there had to adhere to certain rules of the camp and respect other crews, never stealing from another gang's supplies. Again, there was no overall leader. Each gang adhered to its own chain of command. The most famous of these gangs included infamous members like Butch Cassidy, Robert Leroy Parker, and the Sundance Kid, Harry Longblow, but also included such individuals such as Kid Curry, who was Harvey Logan. Before it was a state, the old Wyoming State Pen was first called the Wyoming Territorial Prison at Laramie. In the first year after its completion, 50% of the inmates escaped due to lack of proper facilities and sufficient number of guards. There was no fence to keep prisoners in, so several of them just walked away. Eventually, a stockade and watchtowers were added. By the time of its use as a prison, the escape rate had dropped down to 25%, still quite high, until work began on a state prison at Rawlings in 1888. But that facility did not open until 1901. The building had 104 cells to house both male and female inmates. After 1909, female inmates were transported to Colorado to serve the sentences. In 1936, a gas chamber was added to the prison, and 5 men were killed there. The original cell block did not gain running water until 1978. The prison also used different execution methods. The first executions were carried out using the traveling Julian gallows, which were used to hang Tom Horn in Cheyenne in 1903. August 4, 1910, Joseph Singh was the first official inmate to be hung inside the Wyoming State Pen. In 1916, the penitentiary completed the addition of the death house, which consisted of 6 cells for inmates on death row. The building also housed the gas chamber when it was chosen to replace hanging as Wyoming's official execution method in 1936. Ultimately, 14 sentences were carried out. 9 men were hanged and 5 were executed in the gas chamber. There were several riots that took place at the pen over the years. Kinch McKinney was the leader of a gang and a cattle thief. In 1892, he was incarcerated for grand larceny. In one escape attempt, he and 4 other men led a prison riot and overpowered the guards to escape. They were soon caught, but attempted to escape several other times. For all his escapes, Kinch only had about 8 to 9 years added to his sentence, and eventually was given a ball and chain to prevent getting away so easy. In 1903, President Teddy Roosevelt visited Laramie and was going to take a horse ride from Laramie to Cheyenne. More horses were needed for the ride, so the prison's horses were used, and all the guards but one left the prison to help get the ride started. Prisoners were all locked up before this occurred, except for a 68-year-old inmate and trustee, James Brown. To his surprise, when he finished up and left the chicken house, there were no guards in the towers or anywhere in sight. On top of that, the prison gates had been left open, so James just walked right on out. He was soon caught, and when the warden found out, he was so embarrassed and angry that something like this happened while President Roosevelt was there, the warden gave James 30 more years. At the age of 99, he was finally released from the new state prison in Rawlings. In 1912, a riot resulted in the escape of 27 inmates and the death of 1 local man. 4 inmates were killed in that incident. Bill William Carlisle was known as the Gentleman Bandit, robbed trains, and gained trustee status at the prison where he worked in the shirt factory. On the night of November 15, 1919, he didn't return on time from his work detail in the prison. He had been known to stay behind late some nights when trucks were loaded up with shirts. He escaped inside a packing crate filled with shirts that were regularly shipped out of the prison. He managed to rob a train before being caught, and afterwards completed his prison sentence and was eventually released. Al Bisquirrel, also known as Charles Nichols or William Morgan, was a man that had high hopes from his low position in life. Bisquirrel had been in the prison infirmary for a while after an operation to remove his appendix. On May 16, 1921, he held the prison doctor, a guard, and a laborer that came to do some work at the prison and 7 inmates hostage in the infirmary with a pistol that his wife had snuck into him. He then began making his demands to the warden. He wanted all the guards removed from the walls and a car with 4 women inside to escape with. He was talked out of taking the 4 women as hostage and took the doctor and laborer instead. When Bisquirrel reached the agreed upon distance with the orders not to be followed, a short pursuit took place. Eventually, the doctor was driving the car, wrecked it when he realized he was probably not going to get out of the situation alive. The doctor escaped after being fired upon by Bisquirrel several times. Bisquirrel hid in a nearby ravine where he was shot and then was believed to have taken his own life. One day, one man used broom handles he tied together from the prison broom factory and attempted to pole vault over the wall, but it didn't work. Another inmate tried to climb the wall but didn't realize there was a catwalk on the other side, and when he slipped up over, he fell and hit the catwalk, broke his nose, never actually making it to freedom. In 1959, 4 men dug a tunnel through the tool shed under the old gallows, and after much digging, in an attempt to see how far they had gone, they lit a match. However, they were not aware they hit a gas line, causing a leak. This set off a huge explosion, literally blowing their chances of escape. Lucky for them, only one of the men were injured, and they found out later they had gotten fairly close to the outer wall had they not lit the match. In either the 1960s or 70s, old-timers said another prisoner escaped a few days after the warden's wife heard a knock at the door of their home next to the prison. She opened up the door to see the escaped inmate, who said he was tired and wanted to turn himself in. The warden's wife made him lunch and then walked him back to the prison. While a few men got away from the old Wyoming pen over the years, most were caught and brought back to prison or killed while attempting to escape. In 1988, a joint powers board assumed ownership of the penitentiary and dubbed it the Wyoming Frontier Prison and turned it into a museum. This museum is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and offers tours to approximately 15,000 visitors annually. In 1991, the Department of Corrections was officially created and also absorbed adult parole functions of the Wyoming Department of Probation and Parole. But the system was still very overcrowded. Today, the Wyoming State Penitentiary has a new facility, which is high custody for both general population and administrative segregation housing. It is one of the larger facilities in Wyoming. Wyoming Women's Correctional Center was first established in 1977 and was temporarily located at Wyoming State Hospital grounds in Evanston. In 1980, the Wyoming State Legislature formally created the Wyoming Women's Center, and by 1981 had authorized the establishment of a permanent facility in Lusk. The Wyoming Honor Farm houses 283 adult male offenders and is classified as a minimum custody facility. Established in 1931, the Arnold Farm is located 1 mile north of Rivington and is probably best known for the Wild Horse Program, begun in 1988. The Wyoming Honor Conservation Camp was constructed on land just north of the town of Newcastle, and in 1989, 24 minimum custody inmates were transferred to begin reconstruction of modular buildings. Since its beginning, the facility has grown into a larger prison containing 3 dorms, housing 238 minimum security inmates. The Wyoming Medium Correctional Institution in Torrington is specifically designed to serve as the main intake and assessment center for male inmates not sentenced to death. Its grand opening occurred on January 6, 2010. So let me talk a little bit about security threat groups within the state who often end up incarcerated there. Wyoming, there was the Lincoln Park 13 gang, south side from the southern part of the city, and Southern Criminals. It appears that Southside Criminals 13 is not an active gang anymore, or its members have been absorbed into other Sureño gangs. They may fight Norteños that come up from the Greeley, Colorado area, but Sureños far outnumber them on the streets and in Wyoming correctional facilities. In fact, Norteños are outnumbered by Sureños in Wyoming DOC by a ratio of about 13 to 1. Sureños are currently the largest security threat group and are the most active in the Wyoming prison system, and currently make up approximately 54% of all validated inmates, while Norteños only make up about 4%, with Serene White Power, Aryan Soldiers, Aryan Brotherhood types, and other Aryans combining for approximately 15%. Bloods are about 13%, and there are also a few Crips, as well as some homegrown prison gang members from Modern Outlaws, United by Hate, and Aggressive Family. There are also some Gangster Disciples and Folk Nation affiliates, as well as Warrior Society, Native Gang, and occasionally Wyoming DOC gets some others. Some Wyoming inmates were moved to the Only Springs prison in Crawley, Colorado, being housed out of state, which was a private facility, in early 2002 to 2003. At that time, it was found that Wyoming inmates formed a security threat group known as 307 for their area code, and they quickly gained notoriety due to assaultive behaviors. They were basically a protection group against Colorado inmates, and I recall that during a riot there, Washington State inmates also had their own car. Starting in 2019, it leased prison beds from a private facility in Mississippi. Female prisoners were often held in county jails or one of the state's male prisons because of lack of capacity. But most of those out-of-state housed inmates are now back in the Wyoming system, so the 307 car basically became a non-issue in recent years. In 2023, due to staff shortages, the department sent 240 inmates to the Tallahatchie County Correctional Facility in Mississippi. But staffing within Wyoming's DOC has increased again to the point where some of those Wyoming inmates were moved back to the Cowboy State. I do not know how many of those out-of-state inmates belong to security threat groups. The Wyoming DOC website states that it is committed to public safety through reasonable, safe, secure, and humane management of inmates, probationers, and parolees. It also states that it implements research-based best practices to offer offenders meaningful opportunities to become law-abiding citizens. And so, that's all I have for you on the Wyoming DOC. I hope you enjoyed this short video and come back soon to watch my coverage of other Department of Corrections throughout the United States. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off. Gangsters, cops, and politicians.